The warm glow of the dining room light caught the gleam of polished wood and the condensation on the water glasses. Outside, a cool October evening was settling over Maple Creek, but in here, the air was thick with unspoken tension. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary, usually a comfort, felt like a heavy blanket. My son, Mark, sat to my left, his gaze fixed on his plate, pushing a stray carrot around with his fork. He was a master of avoidance, a skill he'd honed over years of living between two strong-willed women. Across from me sat his wife, Chloe. Her smile was a perfect, brilliant thing, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, sharp and calculating, were watching me, waiting. She thought she had one. She thought this dinner was her victory lap, a confirmation of her control over my son, my grandson, and my life. I took a slow sip of water, my hand perfectly steady. My heart, however, was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had spent a lifetime teaching history, explaining the slow, methodical build-up to great battles. I understood strategy. I understood the importance of choosing your moment. And this was mine. I placed the glass down with a soft, deliberate click that cut through the silence. Mark flinched. Chloe's smile tightened just a fraction. "I believe this is yours," I said, my voice even and calm, the voice of a teacher addressing a student who had been caught cheating. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't an accusation shouted in anger. It was a fact, laid bare on the white tablecloth between us. It was a bank statement. It moved with a soft whisper of paper on wood, coming to a stop directly in front of her plate. For a moment, she just stared at it, her smug confidence faltering. Then, she looked down. I watched the color drain from her face, leaving behind a sallow, shocked pallor. Her perfect smile vanished, replaced by a contorted mix of fear and fury. Mark finally looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion, his gaze shifting from the paper to his wife, then to me. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his voice weak. I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked on Chloe. "I believe the term is identity theft," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as splintered ice. "You have some explaining to do." 3 weeks earlier, my world had shrunk, but not in a sad way. After 40 years of teaching American history to teenagers, a quiet life was a welcome reward. My days followed a simple, comforting rhythm. I woke with the sun, tended to the late-blooming roses in my garden, and read novels on my front porch swing. My small bungalow in Maple Creek, Ohio, was my sanctuary. Every polished floorboard, every framed photograph on the mantel, held a memory. It was a house built on love and quiet dignity. My greatest joy, the sun around which my small world revolved, was my 6-year-old grandson, Leo. Since my son Mark and his wife Chloe lived just 10 minutes away, I had the privilege of watching him 3 days a week while Chloe was supposedly attending classes for a digital marketing certificate. Those were my best days. I lived for the sound of his small feet running up my walkway, the warmth of his hand in mine. He was my legacy, the continuation of our family's story. To help them out, I had started giving Mark a check at the beginning of each month. I called it helping with the bills. Chloe called it an absolute lifesaver. My teacher's pension wasn't extravagant, but I had saved diligently my entire life. I had more than enough. And what was money for, if not to ease the burden on your family? Mark worked hard as a manager at a logistics company, but with a mortgage and a child in a competitive world, they were always just a little short. Or so they told me. The first crack in my perfect picture of family life was small, almost invisible. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had picked Leo up from school. He was chattering away in the back seat about a new dinosaur toy his friend had. "It's a Gigantosaurus. Grandma, it's this big," he said, stretching his arms as wide as they could go. "It costs $100. Can you buy it for me? I smiled into the rearview mirror. $100 is a lot of money for a toy. Sweetie, your birthday is coming up. Maybe we can think about it then. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a small, matter-of-fact voice, he said, "But Mommy says you have lots of old people money saved up. She said you wouldn't even miss it." The smile on my face froze. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. It was just a phrase, a clumsy one, spoken by a child who didn't understand its meaning. But it landed like a small, cold stone in my stomach. Old people money. As if it were a resource to be tapped. A well that would never run dry. That's not a very nice thing to say. Leo. I managed. My voice strained. He just shrugged, already distracted by a passing fire truck. But I couldn't shake it. The phrase echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. When Mark and Chloe arrived to pick him up that evening, I tried to bring it up gently. I had just finished baking a batch of my famous oatmeal raisin cookies, and the kitchen was filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and sugar. Leo said the funniest thing today. I began, placing the plate of cookies on the table. Chloe, already pulling on her coat, barely glanced at me. She was tapping away on her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Oh? What's that?" "Helen," she asked, her tone distracted. She never called me Mom. It was always Helen. A subtle, constant reminder that I was an outsider in her family unit. He mentioned something about old people money. I said, forcing a light laugh. I was just wondering where he might have heard such a thing. Chloe finally looked up from her phone. She exchanged a quick, unreadable glance with Mark. It was Mark who answered, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Oh, you know kids. Mom, they pick up weird stuff everywhere. Probably from TV or something." He ruffled Leo's hair. "Right, buddy? Time to go home." Chloe chimed in, her voice as smooth as silk. "Honestly, Helen, don't read too much into it. He's 6. He doesn't know what he's saying. These cookies look wonderful. But you know how I feel about all that sugar." She gave me a tight, polite smile before steering Leo towards the door. "We're so grateful for your help. I don't know how I'd manage this marketing course without you." I stood in my kitchen, the plate of warm cookies feeling heavy in my hands. The air, which had been so cozy moments before, now felt chilled. Mark gave me a quick, almost guilty hug on his way out. "Thanks for everything, Mom. We'll see you Thursday." I watched them get into their sleek, new SUV car they bought last year after I'd given them a substantial sum of money to fix the transmission on their old one. I stood at the window until their taillights disappeared down the street. They thought I was just a sweet, simple old woman, a doting grandmother who was a little out of touch with the modern world. They saw my generosity not as a gift, but as an entitlement. The cold stone in my stomach grew heavier. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than love when I thought of my daughter-in-law. It was a tiny spark of suspicion, and it scared me. I quickly pushed it down. I was imagining things. I was being a paranoid old woman. Chloe was stressed. Mark was overworked. I had to be more understanding. I repeated these excuses to myself like a prayer, clinging to the illusion of my happy, perfect family. But the crack had appeared, and I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it started to spread. The next few weeks, I tried to ignore the signs. I told myself I was being sensitive. When Chloe mentioned needing extra money for specialized software for her course, I wrote the check without asking too many questions, even though my savings account dipped below a number that made me uncomfortable. When Leo threw a tantrum because I wouldn't let him watch a violent cartoon, yelling that Mommy lets me watch whatever I want, I blamed my own old-fashioned rules. I was a peacekeeper by nature. My entire life, I had avoided conflict. When my husband, Richard, passed away 10 years ago. I had poured all my energy into being the stable, supportive rock for my son. I saw it as my duty, my purpose, and a part of that duty, believe, was to ensure his happiness, which meant ensuring his wife was happy. So I bit my tongue. I smiled my gentle smile. I wrote my checks. I was the perfect mother-in-law, the perfect grandmother. I was a quiet, unassuming pillar holding up their perfect life. I had no idea that the foundation was rotten to the core, and that I was the one paying for the decay. I was so busy keeping the peace that I failed to see I was funding a war against my own dignity. The breaking point didn't arrive with a thunderous crash, but with the clatter of a small spoon on a ceramic bowl. It was a Thursday morning, one of my days with Leo. The sun was streaming through my kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had made oatmeal with fresh blueberries, his favorite, or what used to be his favorite. He sat at the table, his little legs swinging, his expression sullen. He poked at the oatmeal with his spoon. "I don't want this," he announced. "It's mushy." "It's good for you, Tweety," I said, my voice automatically gentle. "It will help you grow big and strong." "I want chocolate chip pancakes," he declared, his voice rising. "Chloe, I mean. Mommy makes them for me. From a box." The mention of Chloe sent a familiar, faint chill through me, but I kept my smile in place. "We can have pancakes this weekend when Mommy and Daddy are here. Today, we're having oatmeal." "No," he shouted, pushing the bowl away. A few sticky lumps of oatmeal slopped onto the placemat. "I want pancakes now. You have to make them for me." It was the tone that did it. Not a request, but a command. The same entitled tone I'd heard in his mother's voice 100 times. I felt a line being drawn in the sand. For weeks, I had been retreating, conceding ground for the sake of peace. But I was a teacher. I knew that some lessons had to be taught, and some boundaries had to be held, or they would cease to exist altogether. "Leo," I said, my voice a little firmer than usual, "we are not having pancakes. You can either eat your oatmeal, or you can have nothing until lunchtime. That is the choice." His face, which could be so angelic, crumpled into a mask of childish fury. "You're mean," he shrieked, his voice piercingly high. "Mommy says you're an old hag who doesn't know anything." The word hag struck me with physical force. It was Chloe's word, her venom, spat from the mouth of my own grandchild. Before I could process the sting, he slid off his chair. I moved to stop him, to tell him that we do not speak to people that way. That's when he kicked me. It wasn't a playful tap. It was a full-blown, angry kick, his small sneaker connecting squarely with my shin. The impact was sharp, a shocking jolt of pain that made me gasp and stumble back. But it was the other shock, the emotional one, that truly took my breath away. This was my grandson, the little boy I had rocked to sleep, whose tears I had kissed away, whose laughter was the sweetest music I knew. And he had just hurt me, on purpose. In that instant, something inside me shifted. The soft, pliable, ever-forgiving grandmother receded. In her place stood Mrs. Miller, the history teacher who could quiet a classroom of rowdy teenagers with a single, level stare. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I looked down at him, my expression unreadable. The fury on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, then fear. He had expected tears or a scolding he could argue with. He was not prepared for this cold, quiet stillness. "Go to your room," I said. My voice was a stranger's, low and devoid of warmth. "And face the wall. You will stay there until your father comes to get you." He opened his mouth to protest, but the look in my eyes must have stopped him. The tears that had been brewing for his tantrum now spilled over in genuine fright. He turned and fled from the kitchen, his sobs echoing down the hallway. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on my throbbing shin, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The smell of oatmeal suddenly seemed sickeningly sweet. The sunbeam felt like an interrogation lamp. The peace of my quiet life had been shattered, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it would never be the same. When Mark arrived that afternoon, he found a subdued, red-eyed Leo and a grandmother who was polite but distant. I explained what had happened, calmly and factually, without embellishment. I told him about the name-calling and the kick. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was his go-to gesture when he felt trapped. Mom, he's 6. He didn't mean it. Kids have tantrums. I'm sure Chloe didn't say that. He must have misheard. He kicked me. Mark, I said, my voice flat. That's not a tantrum. That's violence. And he learned that disrespect somewhere. Okay. Let's not be dramatic, he said, his tone placating, as if I were the child who needed to be managed. Making him stand in a corner for hours? Isn't that a little extreme? Chloe and I believe in positive reinforcement, not punishment like that. His words felt like tiny paper cuts. He wasn't defending his son's innocence. He was defending Chloe's parenting philosophy. He was choosing her side. Even when faced with a physical act against his own mother, he needed to understand there are consequences for his actions. I said, my patience wearing thin. Well, he's just a kid. He was probably scared out of his mind all day. Mark said, avoiding my gaze as he helped Leo put on his jacket. He knelt down and spoke to his son in a soft, conspiratorial whisper. It's okay, buddy. Let's go home. Mommy will make you some pancakes. I watched them leave, Mark's arm protectively around his son's shoulders. He didn't look back. He was so desperate to avoid a conflict with his wife that he would placate, excuse, and ignore anything, even a kick aimed at his own mother. I was no longer a person to him. Not really. I was a problem to be solved, a situation to be managed before he went home to face the real authority in his life. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was heavier than ever. I was completely and utterly alone in this. The next morning, the real storm broke. I was in my front garden, trimming the last of the dead rose blooms, when Chloe's SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. The tires protested against the asphalt. She slammed the car door and marched up my walkway, her face a thundercloud of rage. My neighbor, Eleanor Gable, who was watering her petunias across the street, paused and watched, her watering can held midair. Helen! Chloe's voice was a shrill command. I stood up slowly, wiping my dirt-covered hands on my apron. I had a feeling I knew what this was about. What kind of sick game are you playing? She spat, stopping just inches from me. You terrified my son. He had nightmares all night. All because you couldn't be bothered to make him a damn pancake? This isn't about pancakes, Chloe, I said, my voice steady despite the furious pounding in my chest. This is about him kicking me, and about the things you've been teaching him to say. Her face twisted in mock disbelief. Oh, please. You're going to blame me because your grandson has a little spirit? You're just a bitter old woman, jealous that you can't control Mark anymore. You're pathetic. Her words were stones, thrown with vicious accuracy. Eleanor was now openly staring, her mouth slightly agape. The whole neighborhood was quiet, a perfect stage for my humiliation. You need to leave, I said softly. I'll leave when I'm done. She screamed. And then she lunged. She grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head forward. The pain was sharp and shocking. You stay away from my son. Do you hear me? You are not to discipline him ever again. You lost that right when you decided to be a tyrant. With a final surge of anger, she shoved me hard. I was off balance, and I stumbled backward, tripping over the garden hose I'd left on the lawn. I landed hard on the damp grass. The air knocked out of me. The world tilted for a second. I saw the gray morning sky, the green of my perfectly manicured lawn, and the horrified face of my neighbor. Chloe stood over me, breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She looked down at me with pure contempt. Then, she turned on her heel, marched back to her car, and sped away. I lay there for a moment, the dampness from the grass seeping through my clothes. My hip ached. My scalp burned. Eleanor started to rush over, calling my name. But I held up a hand. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. I didn't brush the grass off my pants. I didn't fix my hair. I walked to my front door, my movements stiff and deliberate. I could feel Eleanor's pitying eyes on my back. Inside, I leaned against the closed door, my heart hammering. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at myself. I saw a woman I barely recognized. Her gray hair was a mess. A leaf stuck near her temple. There was a long, red scratch on her cheek from a rose bush branch I'd fallen into. Her eyes were wide, not with fear or pain, but with a terrifying, absolute clarity. The tears I expected to find were not there. In their place was something else. Something hard and cold and crystalline. It was rage. Quiet, patient, methodical rage. For years, I had absorbed every slight, every manipulation, every act of disrespect, all in the name of family harmony. I had paid for their cars, their vacations, their lifestyle, and in return, I was publicly assaulted and humiliated on my own front lawn. The doting grandmother was gone. The accommodating mother-in-law was gone. All that was left was Helen Miller. And she remembered every lesson history had ever taught her. You do not win wars by absorbing blows. You win by knowing your enemy, gathering your intelligence, and choosing your battlefield. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The first thing I did after closing the door on my public humiliation was walk to the bathroom. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline so potent it felt like electricity humming under my skin. I looked in the mirror. Really looked. The scratch on my cheek was a thin, angry red line. My hair, usually pinned in a neat bun, was a wild, silver mess. I saw the woman Chloe wanted me to be: old, frail, and defeated. But my eyes told a different story. They were clear, focused, and blazing with a light I hadn't seen in them for years. It was the light of righteous anger. Methodically, I washed my face, cleaned the scratch with antiseptic, and combed my hair, pinning it back into its familiar, orderly place. I was restoring the outer Helen Miller, putting the mask of calm composure back on. But inside, a revolution was taking place. The years of quiet compromises, of biting my tongue and opening my checkbook for the sake of a fragile peace, were over. Peace had been a lie. All I had been doing was feeding a monster, hoping it wouldn't eat me. No, it had tried, and it had failed. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. While the water heated, I took a legal pad and a pen from the drawer where I kept my bills. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Leo had refused his oatmeal, and drew a line down the middle of the page. At the top of the left column, I wrote, "Request." At the top of the right, I wrote, "Observation." The kettle whistled. I made my tea, black, no sugar, and returned to my task. My mind, which had been clouded by a fog of sentimental love and willful denial for so long, was now sharp and analytical. I was a history teacher again, assembling a timeline, looking for patterns, for cause and effect. I started with the most recent, working my way back. Specialized software for marketing course. I wrote on the left. On the right, Chloe's weekend spa trip with friends, posted photos on Facebook. Next, emergency root canal for Mark. Observation. New designer watch on Mark's wrist the following week. I kept going. Money for a down payment on a more reliable car. Observation. Top-of-the-line SUV with leather seats and a sunroof. The list grew longer and longer. The transmission repair. The property tax shortfall. The urgent call about a leaking roof. Each request was followed, within weeks, by a luxury purchase. A new handbag. A weekend getaway. Expensive electronics for Leo. The pattern was so obvious, so insultingly simple, that I felt a hot wave of shame wash over me. How could I have been so blind? I had seen all these things. I had even felt a little pang of confusion each time. A small voice in the back of my mind asking, how can they afford that if they're struggling so much? But I had silenced that voice. I had told myself it was none of my business. I had told myself they deserved nice things. I had chosen to believe the daughter-in-law I wanted to have, not the one I actually had. I had been a fool. A willing participant in my own deception. Chloe hadn't just taken my money. She had taken my intelligence for granted. She saw me as a simple-minded old woman, an obstacle to be managed and a resource to be drained. And Mark. Oh, Mark. My son. He was a good man, but a weak one. He saw the inconsistencies too. I was sure of it. But he was caught in Chloe's web. Too scared of her temper. Too seduced by the lifestyle she provided with my money, to question any of it. He was a willing accomplice in his own delusion. The days following the confrontation were eerily quiet. Neither Mark nor Chloe called. I didn't expect them to. I imagined the scene in their house. Chloe, playing the victim, twisting the story into a tale of my unprovoked, hysterical attack on her. Mark, caught in the middle, would absorb her version of events because it was the path of least resistance. Apologizing to her would be easier than confronting her lies. I spent those days in a state of cold focus. I took my legal pad and transferred the information into a dedicated notebook, adding dates and exact amounts I could remember or find from my bank statements. It was no longer just a list of grievances. It was becoming a ledger of fraud. Then, on Saturday, the unthinkable happened. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mark standing on my porch, holding Leo's hand. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, he mumbled, staring at my doormat. Chloe's got a huge study session today. For her final exams. She's really stressed. I have to go into the office for a few hours to catch up on some things. I was wondering if you could just watch Leo for a bit. It was so audacious, so utterly shameless, that I almost laughed. After the screaming, the assault, the humiliation, they were back, acting as if nothing had happened, because they needed me. My function as a free babysitter was too valuable to lose. I saw Chloe's hand in this. It was a power play, a test to see if I would fall back in line, to see if my need to see my grandson would override my self-respect. Normally, I would have melted. I would have swept Leo into my arms, forgiven everything, and the toxic cycle would have continued. But the woman who had been shoved to the ground just days earlier was still in charge. I looked down at Leo. He was hiding behind his father's leg, peeking out at me with wide, uncertain eyes. He looked scared, not of me, but of the tension that was a thick, invisible wall between his father and me. In that moment, my anger at Chloe was eclipsed by a fierce, protective love for this little boy, trapped in a world of adult deceit. He was the real victim here. I made a decision. Of course, Mark, I said, my voice betraying nothing. Bring him in. Mark looked relieved. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. I'll be back around 3. He gave Leo a quick kiss on the head and practically fled to his car. I took Leo's small hand. It was warm and soft. Come on, sweetie. Let's build a castle with your Legos. For the next few hours, I was just Grandma. We built an enormous, colorful castle on the living room floor. We made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cutting them into triangles, just the way he liked. I let him talk, and I just listened. He told me about school, about his friends, about a new video game he wanted. I didn't push. I didn't ask questions. I just let him be a little boy in a safe, quiet space. It was while we were putting the Legos away that the first piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. I picked up a red block. You know, I said conversationally, I was thinking about Daddy's car. Is it running better now, since he had it fixed? I was referring to the $5,000 I had given them 2 months ago for a complete transmission overhaul. Leo didn't even look up from the bin he was filling. The car was never broken. Grandma, he said, his voice light and innocent. Mommy said that was just a story for you. My blood ran cold. I kept my voice steady. Oh? A story? What for? He finally looked at me. His brown eyes wide and guileless. For her new dress and the shoes with the red bottoms. She wore them to her special meetings with Mr. Henderson. He's her mentor, he said, pronouncing the word carefully, as if he'd practiced it. He helps her with her career. Mommy said the car money turned into her investment outfit. She said you have to look rich to get rich. He turned back to the Legos, the conversation already forgotten. But I was frozen. A handful of plastic blocks clutched in my hand. It was all there. A lie, meticulously crafted. A justification, dripping with cynical greed. And a name. Mr. Henderson. Her mentor. The word hung in the air. Sinister and heavy. It wasn't a classmate. It wasn't a teacher. It was a mentor. Someone powerful. Someone important. The expensive dress. The shoes with the red bottoms, I knew what those were. I'd seen them in magazines. Christian Louboutins. They cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the colorful debris of a child's game, and I felt the last vestiges of my denial crumble into dust. This was not about stress or financial struggles. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign of deception. Chloe wasn't just lying about money. She was lying about her life. And she was teaching my grandson that lying to his grandmother was not only acceptable, but necessary. When Mark came to pick Leo up, I was calm. I was the perfect image of a loving grandmother. But as I hugged Leo goodbye, I looked over his head and met my son's eyes. He flinched at the intensity of my gaze. He saw something different in me. For the first time, he was a little afraid of his mother. He should be. The notebook on my kitchen table was no longer just a list of my foolish mistakes. It was a case file. And the investigation had just begun. The name Mr. Henderson became an anchor point for my swirling thoughts. Gave a face, however vague, to the lies. My next conversation with Eleanor Gable was not an accident. I waited until I saw her tending her prized chrysanthemums, then went out to my mailbox, affecting a casual air. Those are looking beautiful, Eleanor. I called out. She beamed, happy to be noticed. Thank you, Helen. A little bit of fall color does the heart good. She lowered her voice, her expression turning concerned. I was so worried about you the other day. Are you all right? That daughter-in-law of yours has a temper like a thunderstorm. I gave her a weary but grateful smile. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Just a family disagreement. You know how it is. She snorted, unconvinced. Disagreements don't usually end with someone on the lawn. She paused, leaning on her trowel. You know, it's a funny thing. For someone who claims to be so busy with her studies, she certainly has an active social life. I see her leaving every morning, dressed to the nines. And that fancy black Lexus is back. You know, the one I told you about. I saw it pick her up just yesterday morning. A man in a suit was driving. This was it. The opening. Oh, that's probably just her mentor, I said. as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She has a Mr. Henderson who is helping her with her career path. Eleanor's eyes widened. She was the unofficial historian of Maple Creek's comings and goings, a walking encyclopedia of local gossip and connections. If anyone knew a Mr. Henderson with a black Lexus, it was her. Henderson? She repeated. Her brow furrowed. The only prominent Henderson I know of around here is David Henderson. He's a big-shot real estate developer from Cleveland. Owns half the new commercial properties downtown. Drives a black Lexus. Now that I think of it. But what would a man like that be doing mentoring a student from Maple Creek? The question hung in the air between us. Eleanor meant it rhetorically, a way of expressing her skepticism. But for me, it was a vital clue. A real estate developer, not a marketing guru. The lie was unraveling, thread by thread. Well, I'm sure it's all perfectly professional, I said, letting a note of manufactured doubt creep into my voice, knowing it would fuel Eleanor's curiosity. Thank you again for your concern, Eleanor. I retreated into my house, my mind racing. David Henderson. A quick search on my old desktop computer brought him up instantly. A handsome, silver-haired man in his late 50s, smiling from the pages of business journals and society blogs. He was powerful, wealthy, and very, very married. I scrolled through photos of him at charity galas, his arm draped around a perfectly coiffed, elegantly dressed woman who was clearly not my daughter-in-law. So this was Chloe's marketing course. This was her mentor. It wasn't just about money. It was about a whole other life. A life of secrets and deception, funded by my retirement savings. The cold anger I'd felt before was now mingling with a profound sense of disgust. She wasn't just stealing from a trusting old woman. She was betraying my son, her husband, in the most fundamental way. The final, irrefutable piece of evidence arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of mail slipping through the slot in my front door. It was a Tuesday. I was sorting through the usual collection of bills and junk mail when one envelope caught my eye. It was from a national credit union, a bank neither I nor Mark had ever used. It was addressed to Mark Miller, but it had my address on it. It was a simple mistake, I told myself, a clerical error. But my hand trembled as I held it. For years, Chloe had been in charge of their finances. She was the one who paid the bills, managed the accounts. It wouldn't be impossible for her to have listed my address on an application, either by accident or design, hoping it would get lost in my shuffle of mail. My heart pounded in my ears. This felt like a forbidden door. Opening someone else's mail was a federal offense. But standing on my moral high ground felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. I was fighting for my family, for my son's future, for my grandson's well-being. I took a deep breath, and with the tip of my letter opener, I slit the envelope. The letter inside was not addressed to Mark. It was addressed to Chloe, and it wasn't a pre-approval for a credit card. It was a rejection letter, a rejection for a $20,000 personal loan. I read the words, my vision swimming. We regret to inform you that we are unable to approve your loan application at this time. The decision was based, in part, on the credit history of the listed cosigner. I scanned down the page, my eyes searching for the name, and there it was, in cold, black type, cosigner, Helen Miller. Beneath my name was a space for a signature. And in that space was a clumsy, almost childish forgery of my own handwriting. I stared at it, mesmerized by the sheer audacity. The loops were too wide. The slant was all wrong. It was a pathetic imitation. But it was meant to be me. It was meant to be my name, my good credit, my lifetime of financial responsibility, all harnessed to her insatiable greed. That was the moment the floor fell out from under me. This wasn't just about lying and cheating anymore. This was a crime. She had gone from being a manipulative daughter-in-law to a common criminal who had used my identity to try and secure a loan. What was the $20,000 for? To fund her secret life with David Henderson? To buy more red-bottom shoes? To pay off other debts I didn't even know about? The questions were terrifying, but the answer was crystal clear. I was no longer just a victim. I was the key witness to a felony. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, the letter lying in front of me. The quiet house felt like a pressure cooker. I had a choice to make. I could call Mark right now, tell him everything, and watch as his world imploded. He would be devastated, broken. He might not even believe me. He might try to defend her, to make excuses, because the alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. Or I could do something else. I thought about my 40 years in the classroom. I had dealt with every kind of deception. Students who plagiarized essays, who cheated on tests, who lied to their parents. My approach was always the same. I never accused without proof. I gathered my evidence. I built my case. And I presented it in a way that was undeniable. I would corner them with their own dishonesty, leaving them no room to wriggle free. The goal was not to punish, but to force a confrontation with the truth. Chloe saw me as a weak, sentimental old fool. She had underestimated me at every turn. It was time to use that to my advantage. She would never expect a methodical, strategic attack from me. She would expect tears, emotional outbursts, frantic phone calls to my son. She would be prepared for a family drama. She was not prepared for a trial. I stood up and walked over to my desk. I carefully placed the bank letter into the notebook with my other evidence. I had the motive, her greed. I had the means, me generosity. I had the opportunity, the trust one had freely given her. And now, I had the smoking gun. My path forward was clear. I wouldn't confront her in a fit of rage. I wouldn't cry to my son. I would do what I had always done. I would prepare my lesson plan. I would assemble my exhibits. And I would choose the time and place for the final exam. Class was about to be in session. And Chloe Miller had no idea that she was about to fail. Spectacularly. The first step in any investigation is surveillance. I needed to see Chloe's secret life with my own eyes. I needed proof that went beyond the innocent chatter of a 6-year-old and the gossip of a well-meaning neighbor. I needed a photograph. The idea of following my own daughter-in-law felt sordid, like something out of a cheap detective novel. But I was long past caring about propriety. My dignity had already been trampled on my own front lawn. What was a little discreet reconnaissance in the grand scheme of things? The following Tuesday, I put my plan into action. I told Mark, in a brief and neutral phone call, that I had a doctor's appointment in the morning and couldn't watch Leo. It was a lie, but a necessary one. After I saw Leo off on the school bus, I got into my 10-year-old, impeccably maintained sedan. I felt a pang of bitter irony as I turned the key. This was the car I'd kept, the reliable but unglamorous vehicle of a sensible retiree, while my money had been funding their luxury SUV. I parked on a side street with a clear view of their house. I wore a wide-brimmed gardening hat and sunglasses, feeling both ridiculous and strangely empowered. I was invisible. Just another old woman waiting for a friend. Precisely 9:15. Chloe's SUV backed out of the driveway. As Eleanor had said, she was not dressed for a community college class. She was wearing a chic trench coat and high heels, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like a woman on her way to a power lunch, not a marketing lecture. I let a few cars get between us and then pulled out, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I followed her out of our quiet suburban enclave and onto the highway heading toward Cleveland. She drove fast, with an aggressive confidence that seemed at odds with the sweet, slightly overwhelmed persona she projected at home. She didn't go to a college campus. She didn't go to an office park. She exited the highway and drove straight into the heart of downtown Cleveland, to a neighborhood of glass and steel high-rises and valet parking. She pulled up in front of the St. Regis, One of the most expensive and exclusive hotels in the city. My breath caught in my throat. This was no mentor meeting. As she handed her keys to the valet, the sleek black Lexus that Eleanor had described pulled up behind her. A man got out of the driver's side. It was him, David Henderson. He was even more handsome and imposing in person. He greeted Chloe not with a handshake, but with a familiar, intimate smile. He placed a hand on the small of her back and guided her through the revolving glass doors of the hotel lobby. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I fumbled with the camera app, my fingers feeling clumsy and foreign. I raised the phone, zooming in as best I could. They were just inside the lobby now, standing by the elevators. The picture would be grainy, shot through the tinted glass of my car window from across the street. But it was unmistakable. It was them. Together. I clicked the button. The tiny, artificial shutter sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence of my car. I took another. And then one more for good measure. I sat there for a long time after they disappeared into the elevator, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. The rage I had been nursing for weeks was now overshadowed by a profound, soul-deep sadness. It was the sadness for my son. He was at work right now, believing his wife was bettering herself for their family's future, while she was here, living a lie in a 5-star hotel. He wasn't just being robbed. He was being made a fool of. And in that moment, my mission crystallized. This wasn't just about reclaiming my money or my dignity anymore. This was about saving my son from a woman who would destroy him without a second thought. The next step was riskier. I needed to get inside their house. I had to see the scope of the deception for myself. I still had the spare key Mark had given me years ago, for emergencies and for picking up Leo. I had never once used it without permission. Felt like a sacred trust. A trust that Chloe had already shattered into a million pieces. I drove back to Maple Creek, my mind a cold, calculating machine. I knew Chloe would be gone for hours. Mark was at work. Leo was at school. The house was empty. It was now or never. Parking on their street felt more nerve-wracking than the surveillance downtown. Here, I was not anonymous. I was Mrs. Miller, Mark's mom. If a neighbor saw me, they would just think I was stopping by. But I felt like a burglar. My hand trembled as I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened with a soft click. I stepped inside and was immediately hit by the smell of Chloe's expensive perfume. Cloying, floral scent that seemed to permeate the very walls. The house was immaculate. As always, it looked like a showroom from a home design magazine. But beneath the pristine surface, I could feel the coldness, the lack of genuine warmth. I didn't have much time. I went straight to the master bedroom. It was exactly as I had imagined, only worse. I opened her closet first. It was like walking into a high-end boutique. Racks were crammed with designer clothes, many with the price tag still attached. I saw the dress Leo had mentioned, a vibrant silk sheath that probably cost $1,000. I saw the shoes, dozens of them, including a pair of shiny black pumps with the telltale red soles, displayed on a shelf like trophies. My heart ached with a fury so intense it made me dizzy. I saw my money hanging in that closet. I saw the sacrifices I had made, the vacations I had never taken, the small comforts I had denied myself, all converted into fabric and leather to feed her ravenous ego. I took out my phone and began taking pictures. The closet, the shoes, the collection of designer handbags on the top shelf. Next, I went to her vanity table. It was covered in expensive cosmetics and perfumes. I started opening the drawers. The top 2 were filled with makeup. But in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a silk scarf, I found them. A stack of receipts. Not for groceries or gas, but for lavish dinners at Cleveland's finest restaurants, for spa treatments, for boutique purchases. All paid for in cash. My cash. And then I saw it. Tucked in the very back of the drawer was a small, leather-bound notebook. It looked like a journal. My conscience screamed at me to stop, that this was a line I shouldn't cross. But I had come too far to turn back now. I opened it. It wasn't a journal. It was a ledger. Her ledger of lies. Page after page was filled with her neat, looping handwriting, detailing her schemes. Each entry was dated. October. Mom's birthday. Angle. Need new tires for the SUV. Too dangerous to drive Leo. Request. $800. Result. Success. November. Thanksgiving. Angle. Mark's bonus was smaller than expected. Need help with property taxes. Request $2. $500. Result. Success. Use for Henderson weekend. January. New Year. Angle. Broken water heater. Emergency repair. Request $1. $500. Result. Success. Bought Louis Vuitton purse. I sank onto the edge of their perfectly made bed, the notebook trembling in my hands. The cold, methodical cruelty of it was breathtaking. She had a name for me in her notes. Not Helen. Not Mom. Just the bank. The bank is getting suspicious. Need to lay low for a few weeks. The bank seemed sad today. A little guilt trip about Leo's future should loosen the purse strings next month. I felt sick. Physically sick. I was not a person to her. I was a resource. Problem to be managed. An algorithm to be manipulated. This notebook was the Rosetta Stone of her sociopathy. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of her cold-blooded, long-term fraud. I couldn't take the notebook. She would know someone had been there. But I could take a record of it. My hands shaking. I took pictures of every single page. I made sure each entry was clear and legible. This was it. This was the evidence that would burn her world to the ground. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it, covered it with the scarf, and closed the drawer. I took one last look around the room. At the monument to greed I had unwittingly financed. Then I walked out, locking the door behind me, the spare key feeling like a cold, dead weight in my pocket. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a hollow, aching emptiness. The family I thought I had was a fiction. The love I thought I was giving was just fuel for a fire of deceit. The only thing left to do now was to let it all burn. The days leading up to the final confrontation were the strangest of my life. I had all the evidence I needed. A complete and devastating arsenal of Chloe's deceit. The photographs from the hotel, the receipts, the ledger of lies, and the forged loan application were all stored in a folder on my computer, the originals hidden in a locked box in my closet. Yet, on the surface, I had to pretend that everything was normal. More than normal. In fact, I had to become the person Chloe believed I was. A defeated woman ready to surrender. The first step was to break the silence. I waited 2 full days after my raid on their house, letting the tension build. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, called Mark. I pitched my voice to sound weary, fragile, and a little bit broken. Mark, I began, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. It's Mom. Hey, Mom, he said, his own voice cautious, guarded. Is everything okay? I've been doing a lot of thinking, I said, pausing as if the words were difficult to say. About what happened. With Chloe. And with Leo. I took a shaky breath. And I think maybe I was wrong. I was too harsh. I'm from a different generation. And I sometimes forget that things have changed. I've been so lonely since your father passed. And I think maybe I hold on too tightly to you and Leo. I could almost hear the relief flooding through the phone line. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. Confession. An admission of fault from me that would smooth things over with his wife. Oh, Mom, no. It's not your fault, he said. His voice softening with a patronizing sympathy that made my stomach turn. It's a stressful time for everyone. Chloe's been under a lot of pressure with her course. I know, dear. I know, I said, my voice dripping with manufactured regret. That's why I'm calling. I'd like to apologize. To both of you. Properly. I was hoping. Could you and Chloe and Leo come for dinner on Sunday? I'll make my pot roast. Just like old times. I want us to be a family again. There was a moment of silence. He was probably covering the phone, whispering to Chloe, who was no doubt standing right beside him, directing the conversation. I could picture her smug, triumphant smile. The old woman had cracked. Of course, Mom, Mark said, his voice now warm and enthusiastic. That sounds wonderful. We'd love to. Sunday at 6? Perfect. I whispered. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone and my hand dropped to my side. The performance had exhausted me. I felt a wave of self-loathing at the ease with which the lies had come. But it was a necessary evil. To catch a master manipulator, you had to become one yourself. Just for a little while. The trap was now set. The bait had been taken. All that was left was to wait for the quarry to walk into it. I spent the next 2 days preparing for a battle, not a family dinner. I went to the library and used their printer to print out everything. The grainy photo of Chloe and David Henderson entering the hotel. The pictures of her closet. The shoes. The handbags. The damning pages from her ledger of lies. The bank's rejection letter. With the clumsy forgery of my signature circled in red. I sealed them all in a large manila envelope. On Sunday, I woke up with a sense of grim purpose. I went through the motions of preparing for the dinner. I peeled potatoes and carrots. I browned the roast. The familiar, savory smell filling my small house. It all felt like a pantomime. A stage play where the props were real, but the emotions were a carefully constructed fiction. I was setting the stage for the final act. The cozy, familiar setting of a family dinner would be the perfect backdrop for the ugly truth. It would disarm them, lull them into a false sense of security. As 6 o'clock approached, my heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. This was it. There was no turning back. I took the manila envelope from its hiding place and tucked it under a cushion on the armchair in the living room, within easy reach of the dining table. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock. I smoothed my apron, took a deep breath, and opened the door. They stood there on my porch. A perfect picture of a happy family. Mark was holding a bottle of wine. Leo was clutching a drawing he'd made at school. And Chloe was radiant. She was wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. And she was smiling her most dazzling, insincere smile. It was the smile of a conqueror. She had won. The bank was back open for business. Helen, she said, her voice like honey. This is so lovely of you. The house smells amazing. She leaned in and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Her perfume was overpowering. The gesture was so false it felt like a slap. Come in. Come in, I said, my own smile feeling stiff on my face. Leo, Sweetie, what have you got there? He proudly held up his drawing. It was a picture of a house with a smiling sun and 3 stick figures. It's us, he said. You, me, and Daddy. I felt a sharp, painful pang in my chest. He had left his mother out of the picture. Whether it was intentional or a simple childhood oversight, felt like a sign. I looked at Mark. He gave me a small, grateful smile. He thought we were on the road to recovery. He had no idea we were standing on the edge of a cliff. We sat down to dinner. The conversation was stilted at first. I asked Leo about school. Mark talked about work. Chloe dominated the conversation, as she always did, with stories about her class. She spun a detailed, plausible-sounding narrative about a difficult professor and a challenging group project. She was a masterful liar. I had to give her that. She was so good at it that even I, who knew the truth, felt a moment's disorientation. Played my part. I listened attentively. I nodded. I refilled their wine glasses. I served the pot roast and the mashed potatoes, the familiar comfort food, a stark contrast to the poison that was about to be served. I let them get comfortable. I let them believe they were in complete control. As we were finishing the main course, I decided it was time. I cleared my throat softly. Chloe, I began. My voice gentle, conversational. I've been thinking about your course. It must be so expensive. All those books and software fees you mentioned. You work so hard. I really admire your dedication. She preened under the praise, taking a delicate sip of her wine. It is a lot of work, she said with a sigh. But it'll be worth it in the end. It's an investment in our future. An investment? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. That makes sense. With such a demanding schedule, I imagine you don't have much time for a social life. You probably don't get to see your friends much. A flicker of something annoyance, suspicion, crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. Not really, she said. I'm completely focused on my studies. That's what I thought, I said, my voice still light. I leaned over to the armchair, my movements slow and deliberate. I pulled out the manila envelope and placed it on the table next to the salt shaker, which is why I was so surprised when I saw this. I opened the flap and slid out the first photograph, the grainy image of her and David Henderson entering the hotel. I placed it in the center of the table. Chloe stared at it. The color drained from her face. Mark leaned forward, squinting. What is this? Mom, what are you doing? I'm just asking a question, dear, I said, my voice losing its gentle edge, replaced by a cool, precise tone. I was wondering what part of the marketing curriculum is taught at the St. Regis Hotel. The trap had been sprung. The air in the room crackled with sudden, suffocating tension. The cozy family dinner was over. The trial had begun. The photograph lay on the table like a bomb that had just been armed. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Leo, sensing the sudden, terrifying shift in the atmosphere, looked from one adult face to another, his eyes wide with confusion. Chloe was the first to recover. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous, and Chloe was a predator. She tried to seize control by attacking. What is this? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Are you spying on me? You psychotic old woman. You followed me? Mom, what the hell is going on? Mark demanded, his chair scraping against the wood floor as he turned to face me. His face was a mask of bewilderment and rising anger. He was looking for an explanation. Any explanation that would make sense of the chaos that had just erupted on my dinner table. I ignored them both. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the next set of exhibits. The pictures of her closet, overflowing with designer clothes, the shoe collection, the handbags. I laid them out in a neat row, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. I was also wondering, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake, if the student loan you mentioned covered this extensive wardrobe. This jacket alone costs more than my monthly pension. Chloe's eyes darted from the photos to my face, her mind clearly racing, searching for an escape route, a lie that would fit. Those are gifts from my parents. How dare you go through my things? I didn't think your parents were that well off, I countered smoothly. At least, that's what you told me last Christmas when you needed money to help them with their medical bills. Mark stared at the photos, then at Chloe. A flicker of doubt, the first genuine seed of it, entered his eyes. Chloe, what is she talking about? My mom gave us money for your parents' prescriptions. She's twisting things. She's a liar. Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. She stood up so abruptly her chair nearly fell over. Mark, Are you going to let her talk to me like this? But I wasn't finished. I reached back into the envelope. Perhaps you paid for them with cash. I mused, pulling out the photos of the receipts from the fancy restaurants and spas. You seem to use cash quite a lot. For someone who is always struggling, you dine out very well. Mark picked up one of the photographed receipts. His face went pale. The Grandview Grill. Chloe, this is dated the same night you told me you were stuck at the library studying for midterms. It was a study group. She insisted, her voice getting shriller. She's taking everything out of context to make me look bad. Because she's jealous of our marriage. It was time for the centerpiece of my evidence. The proof that went beyond lifestyle and lies. I slid the photos of her handwritten ledger across the table. Or perhaps, I said, my voice dropping, each word carefully enunciated. You paid for them using funds from the bank. That's what you call me in your notes, isn't it? The bank. Mark picked up a photo of one of the pages. He read the entry aloud. His voice a choked whisper. March. Angle. Leo needs braces. Consultation fee. Request $1. 000. Result, success. Use for girls' weekend in Napa. He looked up from the photo. His eyes filled with a dawning horror. He looked at Chloe as if seeing her for the first time. The beautiful, ambitious wife he adored was dissolving before his eyes, replaced by a grotesque stranger. Chloe? He whispered. What is this? Is this your handwriting? She stared at the evidence. Trapped. There was no plausible deniability here. It was her handwriting. It was her plan. Her web of lies was laid bare for all to see. Her face, which had been contorted with rage, crumpled. The predator vanished, and in its place was a panicked, cornered creature. He made me do it. She sobbed, sinking back into her chair. The tears came instantly, a torrent of them. It was a masterful performance. She pointed a trembling finger at the photo of David Henderson. David. He has expensive tastes. He said I needed to look the part. He said if I wanted to get ahead, I had to project success. I was doing it for us. Mark. For our future. It was a brilliant pivot. She was confessing to the affair. A lesser crime. In hopes of distracting from the cold, calculated fraud she had perpetrated against me for years. Mark was reeling, staggering under the weight of the dual betrayals. You were cheating on me? He stammered, his voice breaking. It wasn't like that. He was my mentor. He was helping me. She cried. I was going to tell you everything. The money. I was going to pay your mother back. Every penny. I just got in too deep. I watched my son. His world was collapsing. He looked at his crying, remorseful wife. And for a terrifying moment, I saw him waver. He was a man who craved peace, who hated conflict. A part of him wanted to believe her, to accept the easier, less painful lie. I knew I had to deliver the final, killing blow. There could be no ambiguity, no room for excuses, no path back to the fantasy he had been living in. Pay me back with what? Chloe? I asked, my voice cutting through her sobs like a surgeon's scalpel. I reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out the final document. The loan rejection letter from the credit union. I placed it directly in front of Mark. With this $20,000 loan you tried to take out by forging my signature? Mark stared at the letter. He saw my name listed as cosigner. He saw the clumsy, fraudulent signature. He saw the official bank letterhead. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a twisting of words. This was a federal crime, printed in black and white. He looked up from the letter, and the wavering in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by a look of utter desolation, a complete and total emptiness. The woman he loved didn't exist. Their life was a lie. Their future was a lie. He had been her partner, her fool, Her accomplice. Chloe saw the look on his face and knew she had lost. The tears stopped instantly. The mask of the victim fell away, revealing the ugly, raw face of pure hatred beneath. "You!" she screamed, lunging to her feet and pointing at me. "You did this. You couldn't stand to see him happy. You meddling, dried-up old bitch." "That's enough." Mark's voice boomed through the room, a roar of pain and authority I hadn't heard from him in years. He stood up, his body trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. "That is enough, Chloe." I looked at Leo. He had been silent through the whole thing, a small, terrified spectator. He had pulled his knees up to his chest, his little hands covering his ears. My heart broke for him. "Mark," I said, my voice now soft, filled with the authority of a mother, not an accuser. "Take Leo into the living room. Now." Mark nodded numbly, scooped his son into his arms, and carried him out of the room, leaving me alone with the woman who had tried to ruin us. She stared at me, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a venomous fire. She had nothing left to lose. "What do you want?" she spat. "Money? You want me to grovel? It won't happen." "I don't want your money," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "You were right about one thing. Just paper. What I want is my son back. I want my grandson back. I want my life back." I stood up and walked to the phone on the kitchen wall. "I'm giving you two choices, Chloe. The first is, you sign divorce papers. You walk away from this family with nothing but the clothes on your back and the debts you've accumulated. You will disappear from our lives forever. The second choice is, I pick up this phone, and I call the police. I will tell them about the fraud, the identity theft, the forgery. With this evidence," I said, gesturing to the table, "they will be very interested to hear my story." I let the threat hang in the air. Her face went ashen. She knew I wasn't bluffing. The society woman, the mentee of a powerful man, could not afford a criminal record. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Now, get out of my house." Chloe didn't wait until the next morning. Fear is a powerful motivator, far more potent than love or loyalty had ever been in her. The threat of public humiliation and a criminal record was the one language she truly understood. She left my house that night and, in a way, she simply vanished from our lives. She sent Mark a text message 2 hours later. "Single. Cold sentence. My lawyer will be in touch." There were no apologies, no explanations, no final pleas. Just the clipped, efficient severing of a business arrangement that had gone sour. She packed her bags and left their house while Mark and Leo were still at mine. She took her designer clothes, her shoes, her handbags, and her expensive SUV. She left behind a mountain of debt, a collection of joint credit cards maxed out to their limits, and a mortgage that was 2 months behind. She left behind a shattered husband and a confused little boy. She took everything of monetary value and left behind everything that was truly priceless. The weeks that followed were a blur of painful logistics and quiet grief. Mark moved like a ghost through the wreckage of his life. He was silent, hollowed out. He had lost his wife, his home, and his entire perception of his past decade. We sold the big, cold house in the new development. We sold the fancy furniture that had been bought with my money. We sold Mark's designer watch and what little was left. It was a cleansing fire, burning away the remnants of a life built on lies. Most of the money went to paying off the debts Chloe had accrued in their name. There was nothing left over. Mark and Leo moved in with me. My small bungalow, which had once seemed so quiet and empty, was now filled with the chaotic energy of a 6-year-old and the heavy silence of a heartbroken man. It was difficult. There were nights I would hear Mark weeping in his room. A raw, broken sound that tore at my soul. There were days when Leo would ask, his voice small and sad. "When is Mommy coming home?" I answered him as gently and as honestly as I could. "Mommy had to go away for a while, sweetie. But Grandma is here. And Daddy is here. We love you very much." Slowly, painfully, we began to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. The process was not about grand gestures. It was about the quiet, daily rhythm of healing. It was about me teaching Mark how to cook more than just scrambled eggs. It was about Mark reading bedtime stories to Leo every single night, without fail, rebuilding their bond one page at a time. It was about the three of us planting a vegetable garden in the backyard, our hands in the cool, dark earth, cultivating something real and nourishing. Mark took a second job on weekends, delivering packages, to start rebuilding his finances. The work was humbling, but for the first time in years, I saw a spark of pride in his eyes. He was standing on his own 2 feet. The weakness that Chloe had so expertly exploited was being replaced by a quiet, resilient strength. He no longer avoided conflict or difficult truths. He faced them head-on, because he had learned, in the most brutal way possible, the cost of willful blindness. One crisp Saturday morning about 6 months later, I was in the kitchen, covered in flour. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had softened. I had discovered that the best therapy for a wounded heart was a busy pair of hands. I had started baking, not just for us, but for others. I started with a small table at the Maple Creek Farmers Market. My oatmeal raisin cookies, my lemon pound cake, my apple pies made with fruit from our own small tree. People loved them. They loved the simple, honest goodness of them. My little hobby, my quiet act of reclaiming my kitchen, had turned into a small, thriving business. I called it the Miller's Table. Mark came into the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He had dark circles under his eyes from working late, but he was smiling. A real smile. Not the strained, haunted one he'd worn for months. "The market is going to be packed today," he said, handing me a mug. "I loaded the car for you. Leo is outside, polishing the sign." I took a sip of the hot coffee, a comfortable silence settling between us. "Mom," he said finally, his voice quiet. I've never properly thanked you." "You don't have to, Mark," I said softly. "Yes, I do," he insisted, looking me straight in the eye. His gaze was clear and steady. "You saved me. I was drowning, and I didn't even know it. I was so caught up in all of it. The image, the lifestyle. I let her blind me. I let her disrespect you. And I am so sorry." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "You were a good husband, Mark. You wanted to believe in her." "I was a coward," he said, the words costing him a great deal. "But I'm not anymore. You taught me that. You showed me what real strength is. It's not about being loud or aggressive. It's about being quiet and patient and seeing the truth, even when it hurts." Just then, Leo burst through the back door, his face smudged with wood polish, his eyes shining. "Grandma, the sign is so shiny. Can I help you put the pies in the boxes?" I looked at him, my bright, beautiful grandson. The confusion and fear that had haunted his eyes for months were gone, replaced by the simple, uncomplicated joy of a child who feels safe and loved. He was no longer repeating his mother's cruel words. He was asking to help. I looked from my grandson to my son, and my heart felt full to bursting. I hadn't gotten my old life back. I had lost a fortune, and the illusion of the perfect family I had cherished for so long was gone forever. But what we had built in its place was infinitely more precious. It was real. It was forged in truth and resilience. It was a home, not just a house. I reached out and wiped a smudge of flour from Leo's cheek. "Of course. You can help, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. You can be my chief box folder. He cheered and ran to the stack of pastry boxes. Mark put his arm around my shoulders, and we stood there for a moment, watching him. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the flower dust that danced in the air like tiny, glittering diamonds. We had less than we'd ever had before. But in that quiet, sun-drenched kitchen, we had everything that truly mattered. I had lost a daughter-in-law, but I had reclaimed my son. And in the process, I had found myself again. Not just a grandmother, not just a bank, but Helen Miller. And she was stronger than she had ever known.